she's the one who started me, but like a lot of children, I didn't always like to hear my mother yell from the kitchen, "That's an F sharp." So, even though she was a gentle, wonderful woman. And so she thought of having me study at the Dalcroze School of Music in New York. And so when I was 8, my parents would drive me 90 miles every Saturday so I could have, the experience of movement and solfege and improvisation. And I loved being in New York every Saturday. And I lived in a little town. So this was a real opportunity to be with people who really valued music. And so I think that was a huge influence in my life because, the Dalcroze not only emphasizes listening and phrasing, but the movement is always in terms of the phrase and in terms of musical direction and musical character. And I was an improviser as a kid, so I think that was another reason why I thought it would be good for me to be in a situation where people did improvise. I also had wonderful piano teachers, just people who introduced me to Bartok when I was a little girl, and to things that I don't know that I would have learned from everybody, but so I love those lessons. And then after that, my mom thought I should study with another teacher, and she took me to the director of WQXR, the classical music station in New York. And Abram Chasins interviewed me and recommended me to Jeanette Hayne. The student who was right before my lesson was Murray Pariah. So I didn't feel actually he was pretty important at that stage in his life. He was very small and little, and I was sort of, I was a good musician and musical, but I wasn't in it to the extent that he was. I just loved music, and I practiced an hour here and there. But I was always active musically. I accompanied everything that there was in the school, every choir, every show, every singer, every instrumentalist, and I also played the clarinet in the band. And when I went to college, I wasn't sure because I also love to read and love literature. So when I went to college, I chose a place where I could do liberal arts as well as music. So I chose the University of Rochester, which is connected to Eastman. And there was a group of about 6 of us who every week would go from the university where the liberal arts were into town, which is just a couple few miles. We would drive together into town and take our lessons at Eastman and our theory classes and our piano literature classes. So, and then we gave a lot of concerts on the liberal arts campus. Even though I had chosen the University of Rochester because of the connection to Eastman, the teacher that I really should have studied with would not take anybody who would be spending time on philosophy and English and things like that. So I was not that satisfied with my piano lesson. So I graduated a year early, and my mom, who had gone back to piano teaching when I left school, and my sister went off to a private school, she had discovered Robert Pace, who was one of the early famous pedagogues. And she had driven herself to New York once a week for classes with him. And she suggested she asked him who I should study with, and he mentioned Adele Marcus, who was at Juilliard. And so I auditioned for Adele Marcus and did some studying without officially being a master's student for that 4th year instead of finishing my college. I finished college in 3 years, went to Juilliard for a year as a special student, and then enrolled as a master's student. And that's when I discovered that that's really what I wanted to do. I mean, I had gotten into a graduate program in English literature, but when I started thinking, do I like to write papers or do I like to play the piano? So I actually, turns out that I like to do both, but I'm glad I went to Juilliard because there I really felt I was with people that loved the same thing that I loved. And, I loved being immersed in it. I did a lot of accompanying. I was a teaching assistant, so I taught literature, materials, and music. I was on the continuing ed faculty teaching year training 1 year, and I also got a job with another friend driving out to New Jersey at a studio, and that woman introduced me to Frances Clark because that woman had taken some Francis Clark workshops. So the combination of learning about Robert Pace, which in fact I decided to take his pedagogy course even while I was at Juilliard, and then learning about Francis Clark, those were sort of the really strong influences, I would say, in my pedagogical life. I only took one official pedagogy class, and that was with Robert Pace at Teachers College. That was just a walk away from the old Juilliard, 3 blocks away, so I could go there for my pedagogy. But those were the big influences in terms of how to organize teaching and how to think conceptually about what's behind all the music you can assign students, but in what order and what sort of abilities are required in order to study certain aspects of music. And so that's the background. I married a man whose both parents were piano teachers and who met my parents through my aunt who was a piano teacher because they had a friend in common. And so there is this network of piano and music in my family, and both my children studied piano, and then one also did viola and the other did cello, but piano remained the main interest. And all my grandkids have studied piano and are studying something in music. So it's definitely the basis of that and people, because I've always loved to teach. I started pretending to be a teacher when I was 5, setting up chairs in my basement and teaching people. And I taught my first piano student when I was 16. And I don't think I'll ever stop teaching, or I wouldn't know what to do with myself. I always performed too, but when I started thinking, which do I want to do? It was always a combination. And it partly was because I suddenly discovered that the way I can feel happiest when I perform is to feel like I'm sharing just as I share as a teacher, rather than feel like I have to prove myself, as a performer. And so that was very liberating to make that combination clear to myself.
Yeah. Could you elaborate a little bit on your approach to teaching in general?
I believe very strongly the reason for teaching music is to inculcate a love of music in your students. And I think that you can't take a piano lesson and not prepare for it, because then you will never love it. You'll have no skills. So you have to have skills in order to enjoy the process of playing, whether it's for yourself or for other people. So although I think for some children, and doing a lot of competitions and auditions and things like that motivates them, I really feel strongly that you have to get to know the child first through the relationship that you build with that child and the relationship that you build through music. And so I try to decide on, I have a basic approach because reading is to me, very, very important. It's been reading and improvisation, I would say. And the combination of really knowing how to look at notes and make sense of them and then bring out the character and the emotion of music. But I think you also have to have a really good basis for looking at music, because that's when you're free to make music for yourself, make music with other people. And so I think one of the things that attracted me in learning about Francis Clark, who I later collaborated with, was her emphasis on intervallic reading and relating the look of music to the sound of music, the sound always coming first, and the feel. So technique is part of how you get that sound, and then all the details, the symbols and what you call them, came later. And with Pace, he was very interested in developing people in it. And I think Clark too, but their approach was different. He wanted people from the beginning to be able to play in any key and not spend their lives worrying about sharps and flats, but really realize that the piano is such an amazing instrument because you can play anything anywhere on the piano. And so his emphasis was on multi-keys, on starting right away, being able to play in any key and being able to play by ear a lot. And I think what I struggled with as a young teacher was that combination. How do you get students to really hear and to listen and to feel comfortable playing anywhere on the piano? and yet you can not everybody can do everything at once. Some children don't want to improvise or compose, and so little by little you get to know your student and you want to capitalize on what their abilities are, but you little by little want to steer them in the direction of skills that will help them through their lives. I'm now teaching only college students who every once in a while will come, for an audition and get prepared or something, but I'm teaching from 10-year-olds to 70-year-olds. And I'm so newly intrigued by, I have a couple of kids who are such strong oral learners. They learn so well by ear. And a couple of teenagers who came back to the piano after leaving it as children and with such a passion, and they can sit down and play even the last movement of the Moonlight Sonata or part of a Chopin etude with enormous skill, but they cannot read it. And so I'm newly, again, emphasizing how important it is to, with fun, with good materials, but how important it is for kids to be able to read, because these two boys have such musicality and such passion for playing. And I have a grandchild like that too. But you do have to have fingering. You do have to be able to know a line to a line is a third. And you have to, so it seems to me I have all of these. I have a lot of pedagogical knowledge, but it still has to be applied differently to every student depending on what their innate ability is and what their motivation is to keep building on those abilities and adding new abilities. So I try to do a lot of improvisation. I think transposition is important. I think selecting materials that appeal to children are important. That I've edited 2 series of books on the classics, one with Paul Scheftel and one series with Ingrid Clarfield.
Yes.
And we're really proud of those. But I do find that some children really need to also do some jazzy. Well, Paul Scheftel does a lot of jazzy things, but they like jazz. They like popular music. They like the stuff they're hearing when they play their computer games. And I feel that that's one of the ways that I get them is to help them learn those things too, along with the skills that I want them to know, and I want them to eventually get to Bach, Beethoven, and Brahms, Bartok, and contemporary. So, in fact, I find that contemporary music is a good vehicle for children in terms of being intrigued with how the piano is used and new sounds and making up sounds. And one of my good friends from Boston, Diane Gulkejan-Rabi, has been wonderful music for children to discover contemporary sounds. That's also approachable, often lyrical as well as